My name is Anna Hamilton. I'm the Assistant Director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program here at UF. We are delighted to be here with you this afternoon. I don't want to interrupt the food line, so if you haven't gotten a chance to get a snack from Upper Crust or a cup of coffee, if you are one of those brave souls who can drink caffeine at this hour, please help yourself. We also have a sign-in sheet. Please sign in. It helps us stay in touch with you and also helps remind UF that programming like this really matters and that we want to continue to do this. So if you'll sign in, we'd love it. We are so happy to be here with you this afternoon. I'm joined by our formal partners, Beyond 120, who they will introduce themselves. And we also want to thank the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere for helping us sponsor this program. So we'll get started, and I will pass it off to my colleague, Emma. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Emma Barasa. I'm a faculty member in the Beyond 120 program and one of many fabulous organizers involved in planning this event today. As we welcome you to the store, we want to acknowledge that this is the land, ancestral and unceded, of the Potano and Seminole peoples who have stewarded it with care for generations. We recognize how Native knowledge systems have shaped and continue to shape rich practices of conservation, food justice, and storytelling, and we honor their contributions. We also want to acknowledge the painful history of colonization and forced removal, and we commit to working together to honor the past and build our future with truth. As we celebrate Native American Heritage Month this November, we also invite you to engage with and support programs and resources on campus that center Native resources, voices, cultures, and peoples, such as the, please forgive me, this is a long one, the Gator chapter of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program, the Smatters Libraries, as well as the Samuel Proctor Oral History program, which houses and shares hundreds of Native American oral histories. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will pass it on to Eddie, who will tell you a little bit about what to expect in the timeline for this tour.
All right. Hi, I'm Eddie, and I'm just going to give you a quick overview in case, you get lost on the way. But we're going to start out at the Field and Fork packing shed back there. And there we'll talk about Field and Fork and some agricultural justice programs on campus. And then we'll head over to the lake and we'll talk about conservation and the history of organization at UF. And we'll end it off with some talks about the bats and the bat houses and how they came to be. And now I'm going to pass it off to Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Alex, and I just wanted to give another big thanks to our partners who made this possible, both on and off the program. This wouldn't be possible without you and our attendees, our visitors to the walking tour. We hope that you take a moment to read the brochure and learn from this moment. I want to thank Beyond 120 from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and the Center for Humanities and the Public Sphere. So I hope you all enjoy.
Wonderful. Last but not least, Dr. Fanning.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie Fanning. I'm a member of the faculty in Beyond 120, and as the historian on staff in Beyond 120, I was asked to reflect on the importance of storytelling before we kick off this walking tour. So to do that, I'm going to reflect on that importance by telling a story of labor, of a struggle for labor and environmental justice not far from here, near Lake Apopka, where the Farm Workers Association of Florida fought for reparations for pesticide poisoning and struggled to build community resources for farm workers who were displaced from that region. And if you want to learn more about this history, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program has several oral history interviews with some of those farm workers, some of those farm worker activists. But this to kick off the story, in 1996, the state government released funds to buy out citrus and vegetable farms around Lake Apopka. These farms have been polluting the lake since the 1950s and 60s. And there was a thick pea green soup over the lake. Alligators were dying, fish were dying. And to remediate this pollution, they bought out the farmers. They spent some $110 million to buy out the farms around the lake. The farm workers, some 2,500 farm workers who had worked those fields over generations, were offered nothing. There were no severance pay was forthcoming from their employers. There were no reparations coming from the state. As the state is working to remediate this pollution, they're reflooding the fields that were once used for agriculture, and migratory birds landed, and some 1,000 birds died in 1998. It was the largest migratory bird death in history. So state officials are looking into the cause of this death, obviously very concerned about it. And farm workers in the Apopka community are like, hey, we're exposed to these same things. We've been eating fish out of this lake. We've been eating vegetables around this lake. We swim in this lake, and we're sick. They organize. So the community organizes with the Farm Workers Association of Florida to secure resources, to get some attention to their problems and some investigation into the causes of their health issues. That's not forthcoming. So they mobilize to build their own resources: mutual aid, job replacement, community education around pesticides. They also conduct their own research without state support. They interview some 150 farm workers about their healthcare problems, and they found that some of these 150 farm workers, 92% were exposed to pesticides. 83% reported that they were in poor health. 60% had some kind of respiratory problem. 13% reported that there was a birth defect in their family, and 10% that there was some form of cancer in their family. And so beyond that community-based research, they initiated community storytelling. They built a quilt project where farm workers shared their stories of illness and of displacement, and they traveled the state talking about the problems around Lake Apopka. And this storytelling really fueled their campaigns for change in the state. They work to establish education programs around pesticides. They work to initiate sustainable agriculture programs, strengthen labor standards and occupational health and safety standards. They're continuing to campaign for new safety standards around heat exposure. And the point of this is really just to say that this storytelling fueled their campaigns, their continued struggles. Even as many of the activists from the 1990s associated with the Farm Workers Association of Florida passed away due to the health complications from pesticide exposure, this continues to fuel their struggles today. And we are, of course, in the same ecosystems, the same food systems as those farm workers. And today we're going to hear about the fights on campus, the struggles on campus to achieve food justice, social justice, and environmental justice. So I hope that we can take those stories with us and continue to work for change. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our first impromptu storyteller. Now Eddie is going to guide us to our first stop, our first official stop by the Farms and Gardens. So we're going to proceed back on the paved path, and then we're going to go in on that other paved path. So Eddie, if you will, lead the way, and we will follow you. You have not been exposed to harmful pesticides. I did not walk around. I'm old enough to start.
Not to say it's a bad thing.
everybody. We are at our first stop, and our first speaker, the fabulous Dr. Dina Leibowitz. She is currently the director of the plant science program here at UF, but when I met her, she was the program coordinator for Field and Fork, and she's done an amazing job at both of the roles. She is a skilled ecologist and educator, and we're lucky to know her and to hear from her. Take it away.
Thank you so much for the super kind words. I swear I didn't pay Eddie to say that, but it is a pleasure to get to chat with you all. So yes, I arrived back in Florida. I did my master's and my PhD at UF, and then I was gone on the West Coast for about 5 years doing a postdoc and nonprofits, and it was amazing, but I just missed the heck out of Gainesville. It is such an amazing space, and there's so much history and amazing community here. And so ended up coming back and got this job with Anna Pritzia. And so she is the director of Field and Fork. And I was asked to speak a little bit about the history of this place. And the evolution of it has been super interesting. And I feel like this space has so much both kind of evolution, but also just like curiosity and passion. And so much has gone into this tiny little, 1 acre farm. And so it was for a while as a community garden, which, is amazing in its own way, but apparently not fully used and getting piled up with trash and not really the best use of space. And so Anna Pritzia and Diane Rowland, who was faculty in the agronomy department, came together and kind of dreamed up this space of having it be this organized farm where everything that you grow goes to feed people in need. And so it's this idea of going from the individual plots and everybody doing their own thing to, hey, let's pull together all of our resources and create this coordinated approach to how do we show this microcosm, this tiny little example of a food system just on UF's campus. And so this got built into the idea of having an entire little mini world of food systems here. And so students can learn from every piece of the food system, and then also you're doing literal good. You're just feeding people, which is just the most purely kind, amazing, nourishing act that you can do, or one of them in my mind. So, and so here we see this system and the ecology and the agroecology as trying to integrate human needs and ecological needs and kind of sustainability and thinking about using space for the resources that are there. And so we're building a farm based on ecological principles where you're not shipping in everything from all over the place. You're like, what do we have here that we can use to recycle the system and be connected within? And so there's composting that happens in a couple of different places. Any food that isn't used is composted, and then that goes into fueling the fields. It feeds the fields that grow the food. They harvest the food, bring it into the packing shed, learn all about the process of making food safe for people, keep it in a cooler, take it over to the food pantry on campus, which is given away for free for anybody experiencing food insecurity. And then anything that isn't used there gets brought back around and composted again, although I think very little is wasted, but it comes back and creates this cycle. Another thing that was done while I was here is we built a greenhouse so we could start our own seeds also and think about seed saving and working a lot with Working Food, which thinks about how do you adapt local seeds to our environmental conditions, because Florida is amazing, but also horrifying in many ways and one of the hardest places to grow. And it's this amazing agricultural space, but not without effort. People joke about farming marbles or farming on a beach because our sand is so soil. I meant to say our soil is so sandy, but basically the same. And so we think about how do we adapt seeds to the local conditions. We work with Working Food, which is a really great nonprofit that thinks a lot about kind of community food systems and adaptation. And so this whole space is about how do we connect with the amazing people around us, the amazing communities, the amazing ecosystems around us, and work with it and hopefully build something really special by working with it. And, it's really amazing being on the lake is one of the beautiful things. And I know there's going to be a little discussion about what might have happened to this place, but my first year here, they had a Friends of Lake Alice 20th anniversary where it was the 20th anniversary of them saving the space from construction. And so I got to be a part of that first celebration of the power of people actually stepping up and maintaining spaces that otherwise could have been paved over. And And it's just neat having the connectivity to Lake Alice. We actually had an alligator come over onto the farm once. We've had the soft-shelled turtles come and lay eggs. Like, we're connected to everything here. And we love the connectivity and the curiosity of the space and the effort to do well. And I know Leah's going to be talking about a lot of really amazing social justice stuff. And just one memory here is when the Immokalee farm workers came and had a march on campus against Wendy's. All the farm folks here went down there and kind of joined in that march. And I think one of the beautiful things about people interning and volunteering here is that it builds a lot of empathy, because people just have no idea where their food comes from in general. You have all these slush things in the grocery store, and people love the idea of like going out and picking a strawberry, but pick strawberries for an hour, trying to get as many as you can, and it will break your back. And so having people volunteer and just have a moment of experiencing what it's actually like, and even this space is a very farming light. It was not, it was a pretty light touch, but even for that, people who had never done any sort of field work, it is such an empathy building moment of like, oh, even just this hour time and I'm exhausted. Imagine people doing it 12, 15, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And can we use this space to help build empathy and build connection to all the people around us? And the whole idea of like during the pandemic, we had this emphasis of the essential workers going out into the field, and yet they were treated as disposable. Like it was labeled essential, and yet it was disposable. And so how do we build empathy through these experiential education spaces to feed into that? And so I can spend hours talking about this space. We can start picking apart the flowers of the banana if somebody's never seen a banana flower, and I love nibbling all the things, but I think this is probably the amount of time that we have, unless there's a couple of questions but basically it is so lovely just seeing, getting to work with Eddie again and seeing Erilyn, who is in a class with me where we grew, was it mustards? 20 varieties, 19 varieties of mustards with working food. And there's so many memories embedded in this place of people digging in and exploring and growing, and in so many ways, because we love our puns in the vegetable world. So how are we on time? Do we have time for a question or two? Thoughts, concerns, curiosities?
Good time for a question or two.
Eddie and I. These are slightly mystery bananas. They're either Orinoco or dwarf Namwa of some sort, but Micanopy Joe, the banana expert, was here looking at them, and he's like, I don't recognize these. He's growing like 35 different varieties, and they were unknown to him. So we have a fun mystery variety, but they have been very productive, and nobody fertilizes them. I mean, I'm sure they're feeding into the fields, but they're just doing their own thing. They're benign neglect, and they are going crazy. So, although I will warn you, banana flowers are edible with a lot of processing, but we had an Indian professor try it, and he's like, yeah, this is not a good variety for that. So, not the edible flower variety. Any other questions? Yeah? So I came in after the farm was up and running, so I don't know the actual challenge. I would guess a lot of it is just building the political will for it, creating the coalitions who will go to bat for it, kind of like the Friends of Lake Alice came and went to bat for this not being turned into buildings or a highway, or I think the idea of building the will and the coalition where people go to the university and say, hey, this is important, we need to invest in this. And then, of course, finding the money is always hard. But I think when you have the will, you can generally find the money and then figure out a plan. And I think longevity is always a challenge for spaces like this. Like, how do you plan for the future for something that can get taken away from you at any point? And so thinking about how you show the world how important and impactful it is also, I think, a key challenge in a space like this. So, but yeah, I'm so glad you all came out here, and it is a pleasure to get to reconnect, because it is a really special, beautiful place. And I'm just gonna give a plug. They just had their festival last week. who knows? Time is crazy. But tomorrow we're having a festival at another farm space right across the lake. So if anybody wants to come out to the fall festival for the Horticultural Sciences Teaching Farm, it's also another element of like, there's so many ways to connect with space. And here is run as a farm and everything goes to the food pantry. There it's run more as a classroom, and classes each have their own plots and can kind of explore different growing methods there. And so in the springtime, last spring, we had a really great event where we showed how complementary and how important all of these hands-on teaching spaces are. And so, hello. The car agrees, honking in solidarity. But yeah, so we have this space, and then there's the another teaching farm space that does the more kind of classroom extension orientation, and then there's a native plant nursery, which Eddie is going to be tabling for tomorrow, and thinking about restoration of our native ecosystems. And then there's a therapeutic horticulture greenhouse, which helps people kind of both physical as well as psychological healing of working with plants and the power of plants to really help folks work through a lot of issues. And so we will likely do that again in the spring. So keep your eyes open for all these opportunities to connect to place and really feel grounded to the place that you're at and the beauty. And one more thing that I'll say is that it is a challenging world right now, and it's very easy to feel like you want to give up when things get so frustrating. But for me, what helps me is realizing that all the good things we have are because somebody didn't give up. Like, somebody was willing to fight for every single good space that exists. And so when you're getting frustrated or overwhelmed, come connect with these spaces and have a moment of realizing, like, somebody fought for this, and it is an ongoing joy, and we will continue to do that, all in the ways that we can. So with that word, thank you all so much. Thanks for coming out.
We'd have to keep clapping for you.
Oh.
All right, thank you, Dina. Next up, we have Leah Cohen, who is currently a regional organizer for Florida for All, but was previously working with the Agricultural Justice Project as National General Coordinator. She's a passionate and effective organizer, and we're excited to hear her talk.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I'm excited to be here. Thank you to Ronan for inviting me. And you should come up here too, because we have reconnected after working together on the Food Justice at UF campaign, which is what I'm here to talk about in part or in mostly. So when I was still working with the Agricultural Justice Project, which is a coalition of farm worker organizations such as the Farm Worker Association of Florida. They are governing that project along with other worker organizations across the nation and small-scale sustainable farmers across the nation, food businesses, independent food businesses. That's what the Agricultural Justice Project is made up of, and really aiming to change the food system into one that is good for the folks all along the food chain, right? That's a pretty big ask, and definitely not something that is solved in one lifetime. So we did work that was rooted in the work of many, many generations before us. I switched my job in May, but there's a lot of similarities. So instead of telling a story in a sort of traditional sense, I like to ask a lot of questions. And so the first question for you all is a true or false question, which is, are our current societal systems serving everyone? Are they set up in a way in which everyone has the freedom to thrive? So raise your hand if you think that's true. And raise your hand if you think that's false. Okay, so there's a temperature check. This one, I'd just like you guys to just shout out any of the issues that you see in the world, in society, now, in the past, enduring, that need change. Just anything you can think of. Just shout it out.
Climate change.
Climate change. Healthcare. Housing. Labor. Immigration rights. Gender equality. Discrimination. Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but the opposite of awesome. All right. How do you think change comes about? If we're going to try and change some of these things, what do you think we need to do that?
Going against the status quo.
Again, going against the status quo.
Money.
Money. That is truth. Money. Mm-hmm. A platform. Meaning?
Social media could work, a website.
Okay.
Something that shows what you're standing for.
Okay, great. So like the tools to communicate. Mm-hmm. What else do we need to make change like that? Community. What was the other one? Willing people. Will. So Dina talked about will. That's a super critical element to create change, right? And not just will of one person, but will of a lot of people, or the people who have the power, which can be the people in power at the top, or it can be the masses, right? So what we talk about in organizing is that power is organized people and organized money working together. So money is definitely a part of that. And organizing power can be harmful, or it can be for the people and be good, right? We have both. So we have to be better organized than those who are trying to create or maintain the systems in which not everybody has the freedom to thrive. At least this is my perspective. The work that I do in my life is always based on that principle that everybody should have the freedom to thrive, and that we should change the systems in order for that to be true. All right, so can we do all of those things at the same time? Can any one person or any one coalition or any one group tackle all of those issues at the same time? Yes, no. I see a lot of shaking of heads, so I'm going to go with the vibe is no. It's too much, right? And so when we create campaigns to change a particular issue, which we're going to talk about a campaign in just a second, what we need, in addition to all those other things that you talked about, one of the things that we need is an opportunity. And that opportunity is it is the conditions that create a situation that is ripe for building momentum, right? And so you kind of got to pay attention to what's going on. And these issues may be enduring, they may go back a long ways in history, but there are moments at which we can capitalize on a situation and then create a campaign around it that builds momentum. All right, so what we did was Ronan and I were part of the Food Justice at UF Coalition here, and it was a 2-year campaign. If you look at it just through that lens, 2020 to 2022-ish, and it was designed to change the UF food system. So who here, raise your hand if you've eaten on campus in the food services, not from the farm here. Awesome, okay, so this impacts all of us, really, and it impacts the entire community because throughout UF's food system, the way in which the food gets to campus for people to purchase or eat impacts all kinds of community members in Gainesville who work in the food service, who work in distribution, people who work across Florida, across the nation, and across international borders to actually tend, harvest, prep, package, distribute that food, right? So it affects just about everybody. And so one of the things there were a lot of opportunities that threaded together, coalesced for us to be able to start this work. And I want to just name a couple of them. And then I'm going to let Ronan talk about the first one, which is that there had already been years of work done in Alachua County and in Gainesville by the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee locally to pressure the local governments, the city and the county, to end their contracts with prison labor. So in Florida and in our nation, our prison systems and those who are incarcerated are used as free or near free labor throughout our food system, but not just our food system, for construction, for lots of projects in the private sector. And that enables profit making. That's what it's about, basically. So I'm going to let Ronan talk just for a minute about like that thread, that opportunity, and what happened with that campaign that laid the groundwork for food justice at UF.
Yeah, so in addition to the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee on campus, there was the group, the Coalition to Abolish Prison Slavery, CAPS, which I was not in, but the lore was kind of handed down to me later. So CAPS was organizing along with that group against the city and the county, but also against UF, because in UF's IFAS extensions, they were using this unpaid or barely paid prison labor, and they were campaigning against UF to get them to cut this over the course of several years. And UF did by 2020, under President Fox. They agreed to stop contracting with prison labor in the IFAS extensions due to the symbolism of it, is what it said in Kent Fox's little letter that went out, which is interesting because it's not admitting that it was wrong in the first place, but just saying it looked bad due to the symbolism of it. So make of that what you will. But the groups like the Coalition to Abolish Prison Slavery and their allies kind of noticed that even with this huge step forward, UF had not fully ended its relationship to the prison industrial complex because of its food service provider, Aramark, who had provided food at UF since the 1990s. Like
27 years.
Yeah, 27 years. This company, Aramark, had been running the dining halls, and even like Starbucks on campus had been previously run through Aramark. So these other companies were still under the Aramark umbrella. But Aramark doesn't just bring food to campuses, also brings food, if you can call it what it brings to prisons, to these prisons, because it also has contracts there. And in those prisons, it uses unpaid or barely paid prison labor, slave labor, if you want to call it that, in the kitchens to prepare the food and as a cost-cutting mechanism, basically. So the groups like CAPS and the groups I was in, as we became involved, kind of pointed this out, that UF is still invested in the prison industrial complex through contracting with Aramark. But in 2020, the contract was up to be renegotiated, and there were some signs that UF might look elsewhere from Aramark for that contract. So we kind of initiated this movement. Different groups got together. I was in Students for Justice in Palestine, and some of my kind of comrades there were like, hey, let's sign on to this group, where the Student Farm Worker Alliance and CAPS and Dream Defenders and the Black Student Union kind of all signed on to this food justice coalition, who were petitioning UF as they were starting to think about what a new food service contract would look like, to petition them to listen to all of the stakeholders, including farm workers, incarcerated people, food service people working in the dining halls even, because there was a committee, what was called the Invitation to Negotiate Committee, the ITN committee, that was UF Business Service and students. And it was business service listening to the students, saying what they wanted from a new food contract. But, that's leaving some people out. That's leaving out the farm workers who are producing the food. That's leaving out the food service workers on campus who are then serving the food to the company, people who have a stake in that decision of the new contract that's coming through. And because it was late 2020, early 2021 that this was being negotiated, these meetings were done over Zoom when previously they had been open to the public. So that was the first step of the campaign, was saying, like, make these public again, let us know what's happening, give us a voice, let us speak in them. Did you have a follow-up on that?
I have more to say, but finish whatever you'd like to say. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to run through the rest of the campaign and through the Reitz boycott stuff. Yeah.
Just a sec. So that's another opportunity, right? Like the fact that the Aramark contract was ending. It was a 10-year contract, and they had been automatically renewed without this invitation to negotiate several times, which is how they ended up with 27 years of control over the food system at UF. And so because there was this win with the city and county cutting contracts with prison labor, and all these people were organized, right? Then we realized that there was this momentum on campus where the students had gotten involved to pressure UF to end prison labor. Food system is rife with prison labor. Aramark's contract is up. And then there was a community coalition that had formed that I was part of, because we were not initially, we were working parallel, essentially. We had gotten wind that Aramark contract was up, and we formed what was at that time called the Food Justice League, which was the Farm Workers Association of Florida, the Alachua County Labor Coalition, the Agricultural Justice Project, Working Food, YDSA, and I think Natural Resource Defense Council, and we came up with a list of 5 demands. This is all while CAPS was pressuring UF to get rid of prison labor, right? And to do it sooner and faster. And just FYI, to like put a piece of history in there, President Fox made that statement that prison labor was not in line with the principles of the university 3 weeks after George Floyd was murdered. That was part of the response to saying that the UF was going to deal with racial justice issues, was to say they were going to end the contracts. But they weren't going to end them until 2021, and CAPS was able to pressure them to end them by September that year, I think, September in 2020. And so, anyway, so we were organizing, we created a list of 5 demands, and one of them that I want to focus on, because we just heard a beautiful story about the Farm Worker Association, is that one of those demands was for protections, rights, living wages, safety protocols, monitoring, public transparency of how farm workers in the food system were treated at UF, right? And an accountability mechanism where UF wasn't just policing itself in terms of how it was doing, that needed to be a third party, which was the Good Food Purchasing Program. And so that all coalesced into us being able to form the Food Justice at UF Coalition to pressure UF to change in lots of ways, 6 different ways. We combined our demands so that now there were 6 instead of 5, and prison labor was one of them. And I'll let you announce the win, and then we have 1 minute left.
We have 1 minute. So we had our 6 demands for accountability from UF, and me and other people stood outside of the Reitz Union, handing out flyers saying boycott the Reitz Union. That was our form of financial pressure onto UF, sending emails, making phone calls. Eventually in April of 2021, kind of culminated in our 3-day-ish occupation of the Reitz Union, where we camped out in the business services hallway where these decisions were being made, and made a lot of noise and hand-delivered letters because emails weren't being responded to, and just made a lot of problems and a lot of noise, and tried to stay overnight until we were kicked out, eventually with a police officer coming to make everyone leave. But we were back 6 a.m. the next morning to continue making a lot of noise, and just demanding meetings between people in business service, and not just the students, because they'd been willing to meet with the students, but our demand was to include people like Leah, people like Jeremiah Tattersall, who's in the Alachua County Labor Coalition, and Neza from the Farm Workers Association, who were experts who could give better testimony than us students in these meetings to show UF why it was so important to make these changes. So we got these meetings, and that was kind of the peak of the radicalism and activity that we got. And definitely when eventually UF did end its relationship with Aramark and brought in Chartwells / Compass Group, which does not contract with prison labor in the United States. It does in other countries, but a step up, definitely, but there's still really deep problems in UF's food systems. There were mass layoffs of food service workers at the end of the spring semester going into the summer that were unannounced, with just barely some notice, and still paid less than $15 an hour, which is not even a living wage at this point. But there were still parts of the new contract and outward-facing aspects of the new food service system reflect the effort that myself and lots of other students and people off campus as well, like Leah, put into that campaign. So for me, as a little 20-year-old wannabe radical organizer, it was a real cauldron of education in how to just do all of that stuff, and I took a lot of lessons from it, and it was a really important experience, and I think we did make a difference. So. Yeah, I think we have to move on.
Yeah.
We'll have plenty of time to chat after the tour, too.
Yeah. Okay. Ready?
All right, now we're going to head across the lake. We're going to cross the road and we'll hear about some organizing and history of campus. All right, hi. Our next speaker is Dr. Clarissa Carr, who is a researcher and professor with the Historic Preservation Program at UF. She's a Gainesville native with a passion for preserving history through design and communication.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of the walking tour tonight. So I'm working on a larger research project looking at UF campus planning and preservation history. Even though I'm a Gainesville native and a triple gator, there's a lot that happens, you know, when students come and graduate. We forget a lot of the history that happens here on campus. And as our previous speakers were mentioning, where do we go and be grateful for what people have done before us? A lot of fighting for different spaces. Campus would look a lot different if it weren't for certain people. So one of those people is law professor emeritus Roy Hunt. He is still alive. He's living in Oak Hammock, and he's one of essentially the grandfathers of historic preservation in Florida and responsible for a lot of what you see on historic campus today. And he encouraged me to start this research project and start collecting oral histories on people who played roles. And for this first project, you're going to have to listen to me twice tonight. So looking at the Cross-Campus Highway or Lake Alice Loop project, he encouraged me to interview law professor emeritus Joe Little. And I did so at the end of June, and it's now part of the Samuel Proctor archive. It's on the YouTube channel. But just to show the importance, he passed away this month. So timeliness, especially with these people who have done important things for campus, is really something to keep in mind. So imagine this, 1969 here in Gainesville. The Florida Department of Transportation, along with President Stephen C. O'Connell, agrees to start dredging Lake Alice and building a 4-lane divided highway that goes from where the Levin College of Law is, loops all the way around Lake Alice, and connects to Archer Road. You can see it here in green. Their argument was to accommodate the increasing traffic on campus. Students were, in this era, it was more commuters, right? We didn't have the campus public transportation system, cue the bus, on campus. So they were trying to think of, what can we do? I don't really know the full motives, but this would have cut right through the heart of campus. And not only bring cars, but also threaten the wildlife encircling and living in Lake Alice and these surrounding areas. So what they did was, Joe Little, he formed an ad hoc committee. He was a brand new professor of law. They had just moved from the east part of campus. Levin just moved to where they are today. So he was right where the action was. He was writing different legislators, trying to, essentially, he found out that the Department of Transportation was required to hold a public hearing, and they were not holding up to their end of the bargain. So he was demanding that they hold a public hearing, and through many, many letters through the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, Archie Carr, Marjorie Harris Carr, all these important environmentalists in Gainesville. A student group was formed as well. Different professors on campus all got together. And finally, in 1971, in the brand new Reitz Union, they had the public hearing. And it was overflowing. Just imagine the grand ballroom packed, and then people flowing outside trying to protest this. And there's record of this public hearing. And you can, at the very beginning, they introduce the people in favor of the loop, and it's like less than 5 people. Everyone else wants it to stop. So you see, like, there's different comics in the alligator. There were, I'm losing my papers, but here is Joe. You can see he's standing on a podium outside of the Reitz Union talking to people. So with this sort of attention, they were able to obviously stop the Lake Alice loop. So just one of the important kind of examples of grassroots activism and showing how strong we can be as a campus community and a Gainesville community if we get together and speak out about something that's important to us. So that's my part one. So any questions on the Lake Alice Loop Cross Campus Highway project? Okay.
All right. Oh.
Yeah.
I'm trying to visualize where the highway would like extend out to around here.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I'll walk closer to the crowd. So here you go. You can see here's Levin College of Law.
Yeah.
And then all the way around, there's a couple different outlets connecting to Archer, and then here.
Where are we on that?
We are essentially like right about here. So this is Corey Village. The arrow. So we're right about here right now. So we'd be in the highway. Yeah. So we'd get run over right now. So yeah, I'll zoom in for Deborah's video.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Now we're going to head across the street again. Let's see if we can make it all across in one go. At this stop, we have 2 speakers. One of them you might remember from, 2 seconds ago, Dr. Carr. And then after her, we have Dr. Shelley Johnson, who is with IFAS Extension, as well as a member of the Wildlife Ecology and Conservation staff here at UF. She's a dedicated conservationist and educator with a passion for native wildlife and natural resources. So we're going to start with Dr. Carr. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm a historic preservationist, but I have a really hard time remembering dates, so I have to type all this up. So I'm going to take you from the 70s, and let's fast forward to 1987. So if you're in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences now, where you do your academic advising, I don't know the name of the building. Farrier Hall, yes. So before that building was there was Johnson Hall. So it was the campus, essentially the Union before the Union was built. It was a dining hall. At one point it had a club called the Rathskellier, which was the only place that could serve alcohol on campus. Well, different bands would perform there. But one night in December 1987, a grease fire let loose and the building burnt down. So not only was this a loss to a historic building on campus, this was also the home of a very large bat colony on campus. So that night when they were out feeding, they came home to a pile of ash, essentially. So what do? They need to find a home, right? So they look for the next best place. And that place are the athletic facilities on campus. So the tennis stadium, track and field, they take roost under the bleachers. So take a deep breath. I can't imagine you'd want to sit for multiple hours watching any sort of sporting game. And the University Athletic Association did not want that either. So the Athletic Association has funding. A lot of these projects, right, you need funding to make something happen. So they sought out doctoral student Jackie Bellwood and wildlife ecologist William Kern to propose the construction of a large bat house similar to this. These are not the original ones. To be built in 1991. At the time, it was the largest man-made bat house in the United States and would eventually house, I might not have the most recent number, but over 60,000 bats. Problem was, the bats did not take up roosts immediately. It took them about 4 years to finally completely call the place home. In those 4 years, this part of campus was still slated where it could be developed for residential housing. There, you know how we have like Quarry Village, Simon Village, the family housing on grad and family housing on campus. There was another grad and family housing closer to Shands called, it's not Shurit Village, I think is what it was called. But Shands had bought the property that the building was on. They wanted to tear it down to build more medical facilities, and so this was the proposed next spot for more grad and family housing. Thankfully, students, faculty protested. It didn't take a lot of, still significant effort, but it was not the big fight that they would have to fight later on, and the project was tabled for the time being. In this meantime, a group called the Friends of Lake Alice was formed with Dr. Ari LeMay and Kim Tanzer, professor of architecture. And they were looking at kind of a link of this Lake Alice Bat House area all the way up to the Gulfview neighborhood, historic neighborhood off 2nd Avenue. So kind of looking at this chain link of green spaces and conservation land on campus. Time passed. The site became threatened again with, it was still zoned for residential development on the campus master plan. They proposed to construct, and this was in 1997, 96, 97 came the second attempt at construction of 11 buildings, about 167 units. Imagine that right here, parking lot, flat surface parking, everything that would come with that. This brought a lot more attention from student protesters and similar groups, as I mentioned, across the street. So we had Sierra Club, Audubon Society, because it's affecting the same kind of ecological system, right? So Friends of Lake Alice, they all got together, they organized protests, and it got the attention of Governor Lawton Chiles. He sent his cabinet down here in the late 90s to both survey the pros and cons of the site. UF tried to think of creative ways to make both parties happy, I guess, and suggested moving the bat house across to that side of the street because of safety concerns of people gathering, right, to look at the bats flying out at night. But I think we know most likely the motive behind that was to clear this for construction, right? So I have a few more visual aids. And there was a ton of press about this. If you look through different newspaper articles, you can see, students protesting here. It says, bats not buildings is one of the signs. Different groups came and made their voices heard, especially this is another one of those important grassroots movements. You can see also on our 34th Street wall, if you want to pass it around. We've got some graffiti on our wall talking about finally the bats were saved, right? So in 1998, Governor Lawton Chiles finally decided through the information that his cabinet brought back up to him after surveying and talking to both parties that this place would be safe for 15 more years. This was in 1998, so that time has expired. You can see the bat houses are still here. And now the campus master plan designates this area as an urban park. So when you look at preservation isn't just buildings, it's about spaces too. And for campus especially, if you want to stay informed about future use of spaces, is to look at the campus plan, the master plan. They do it every couple of years, And you can see how they're zoning different areas and future thinking of what will be developed. So that's my part. Don't wanna hold it too close.
Thank you very much. One step this way, apologies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shelley Johnson, who is UF IFAS Extension State Specialized Agent in Natural Resources, who's here to tell us a bit more about the bats.
Thank you. I am a wildlife ecologist by training, and I've spent a lot of years working on wildlife all over the country, and one of my favorite animal groups to work on has always been bats. So I take as many opportunities as I can now to still come out and do work on the bats here, educate others on the importance of bats. I do want to continue a little bit with the history storytelling to get us from where she left off until where we are now, which she talked about the first house. So I'm going to keep pointing there because it's not there, but it was there until a couple years ago. So the space to the right, your right, of the farthest right house that you see. So that was built in 1991, and it did take a few years for the bats to finally move in. They moved in, they were doing great. Eventually, they recognized that they might need more room for more bats, and so they built the second house, which was the one immediately to the left. So the one in the front was called the bat barn because it was the barn to the house, and it was built in 2010. It also took a few years for the bats to move in. This is not unusual. Even if you put a little bat house up, it can take a few years for them to move. So the bats moved in there, they were doing great, and then around 2017, they're keeping eye on the original house, and it's not looking so good. It's getting old, it's starting to decay, as wooden structures in Florida do over multiple decades. So they built the third house, which is the one you see on the left. So a second barn, if you will, and that was built in 2017. And the bats did not also move in there. Come a few years ahead, 5 years later, the bats still had not moved into the third house, but they were still really loving the first house and the second house. This is when I got looped into the conversation. I looked at my email today. It was April 11th, 2022. And that's an important date because I got an email saying, hey, the house is falling apart. We need help trying to figure out how to get the bats to move so we can take the house down. And I looked at my calendar and I said, well, guess what? Yes, I can help you in August. Because in April, that's when all of the pregnant females return, and they're all in the house having their pups. And all our bats in Florida are protected all year round, but especially from April 15th to August 15th, it's actually unlawful to do any type of exclusion with bats. So, bad timing. If they would have reached out probably several months before, but it was on the back where you could see all of the decay. You can't see it from this side, so I think only the people that worked here were the ones that were noticing it. So the challenge then was, well, how do we make sure the house stays up through the storm season, through the hurricanes and thunderstorms that will happen in the summer. And so they did some bracing, they put up some more beams and crossed our fingers. And the challenge at that point was trying to figure out where those bats would go. So there was an empty third house that they never still had used. The second house was very full. The first house was very full. So all of those bats needed to ultimately go somewhere. It's to the benefit of the university to not have them move back into another building or another stadium. They would like them to be here. So we had the opportunity over that summer season to try and brainstorm and figure out maybe different ways of how do we get the bats to move into the third house? How do we make that be a place that they want to be? We've talked a couple times about will. Bats also have will. They're sentient beings. They have their own little brains and their own little wings, and they can go wherever they want. So we cannot make them go places. We can encourage them to go places, and we can encourage them to not go places. But ultimately, it has to be their decision. So we did over the summer, did some little tweaks and things to the third house. Also, the first house kept falling apart, so that might have also influenced them to not want to be in there. There were raccoons in there, there was rain coming in, and they really, really love to stay where they're at. They love their home, and they didn't want to leave. But we did make it through the summer. Come August, miraculously, a few bats started to move into the third house. So something that we did made it a little bit more hospitable for them. That was a good cue for us that it was maybe time to start thinking about doing the exclusion. So this was now September. We came in, they covered up the house with netting, basically so the bats could get out at night, but when they would come back in the morning, they wouldn't be able to get back in. So left that up for at least a week, generally, when you do an exclusion like that. So all the bats come out, but they can't fly back in. And they were starting to use the third house. And they all came out of the first house, so there were no more bats in the first house. And once you're done with the exclusion, you need to take down the structure in this case, so that they can't just go back in, right? Otherwise, they're just going to fly back in there once we take the netting down. The interesting thing is, it happened to coincide exactly with when the Hurricane Ian was coming through Florida, and campus closed for 1 or 2 days. And that was right when the exclusion was done. So they actually came and pulled the house down. Campus was closed. Everyone came back after the hurricane was over, came by here and said, "Oh my God, Hurricane Ian took down the bat house." So that is a rumor that you will hear, so I'm dispelling it for you. This was actually months of planning and in process, but it happened to coincide, and probably for the best. So that is why there's now only 2 houses. You will still even see photos of some with 3 houses. Right now, it seems like there's plenty of space for the bats, as it is. As I mentioned, this is a maternity colony. So in the summer, it's all pregnant females. There could be 300,000 bats in there. So it has grown quite a bit since the first colony moved in. And by the end of the summer, every one of those females has had 1 pup. So basically that means our population doubles. So by the end of the summer, so come in August if you want to see the most bats coming out. That is when you're going to see the most spectacular emergence. And then naturally, as we get into fall, there's no reason for them to stay in a maternity colony anymore. They do disperse if they want to. They don't all. Some of them prefer to stay, and some of them go hang out elsewhere. And they're not necessarily going as a group, they're just dispersing. They don't need to be in a colony. They can go wherever there's food and water. So that's what we're seeing right now. There's definitely fewer bats that you're going to see tonight if you stay for another probably 15, 20 minutes. Usually about 10 or 15 minutes after sunset is when they fairly reliably will emerge. So people have noticed in the last few weeks, about the last month, there's been an exceptionally low number. So there could be different things going on with that. There does seem to be very few bats. There's still some bats in there. So I'm not necessarily worried about there being a low number. It is natural for the population to drop in the fall and winter. But they may have gotten a little bit worried about all these hurricanes we did have this summer. When the population really was noticeably dropped was right after our back-to-back hurricanes, and then immediately followed by a lot of dry, cool weather. And, if I can get into a little bat brain, I would say maybe they're in there like, well, what is going on? This place is crazy. Maybe we don't want to hang out here for the winter. So we've seen some weird behavior with bats in general going on, where maybe they decided they didn't want to stay in there. Maybe some of them came back. It just seems to be especially low this winter. So maybe that will still continue to fluctuate. Come in April, and I'm hopeful that we'll be back at our same maternity roost colony numbers. So we talked a lot about the lake and the farm being here. So I wanted to definitely mention the benefit of those things to the bats and the benefit of the bats to those things, both. So the most important thing to bats when they get up, first thing they do is they need water and they need to eat. So this is all provided right here for them. They can actually drink over the water. They can go down and drink while they're flying. So they can drink from the water on the lake. They also have plenty of food from the farm because they're the only major predator of night flying insects. There are major benefit to humans, not only because they eat things that bite us that we don't like, but they're eating moss, midges, beetles, all of those things that are eating your garden at night, the bats are eating. So they have done some work estimating across the entire United States that bats annually are saving farmers $20 billion per year in saved cost of not having to use pesticides and not losing crops because of bats, estimated we can extrapolate across the country every year. So they have a huge benefit, hugely beneficial to provide habitat for them. For that reason, they don't have a lot of natural predators, although if you come here very often, you will often see hawks, owls, and crows hanging out on the bat house, on the fence around the bat house, in the trees here, just waiting for a bat to come out, and they absolutely will nab them and eat them. But the number of bats that one hawk can eat is very, very few. So what is really regulating the population of bats is lack of habitat and habitat loss. So bats don't just live in human-made structures, they live in caves, crevices, vegetation, oak trees, pine trees. They are living in all of the natural habitat around us, and so that's why it's very important to think about habitat conservation. Really is the most important thing when we're worried about bat conservation. So I could talk for a long time about lots of bat facts, but maybe you have specific questions.
And it was like sticking its hand into the hole and just like grabbing a bat and eating it. So yeah, we had never seen. I actually have a video of it if anybody wants. There was a raccoon like crawling up and doing the thing where they're not even looking, but you feel them like feeling around and then grabbing a bat out. So it was kind of crazy.
Thank you. Yes.
What does the inside of the bat house look like?
That's a good question. So it looks like a bunch of vertical flat boards all the way up to the top, and they're about 2 inches apart, and there's just entirely filled with those. So the entire thing is filled. And even if you get a little small bat house that you put up in your backyard, it's the exact same structure on the inside. For our bats here in Florida, these are Brazilian freetail, Tigert brasiliensis bats that live in here. They're about 10-gram bats. They're, 12-inch wingspan. Their bodies are about this big. They're not very big bats. So they want this space where they can just go up in there, kind of be cozy, and it needs to just be something that they can grip onto. Other questions?
What exactly went into enticing them to go to the third house? How did you guys make them do that?
So she's asking what got them into the third house. We don't know for sure. So because we just tried a lot of things and who knows if any of them were the reason. So we tried adding, you can see some small bat houses on the outside of it. We added little bat houses on the outside of the big bat house, thinking, well, maybe if they went in the little bat house, others would come and say, well, we're hanging out over here now. So we put those up. They put up some more boards around the undersides acting as a landing pad, which may have been something that was probably important. I think that might have been one of the key factors, because it's hard for them to just come and fly straight up. It's better if they have somewhere to land and then they crawl up. They opened up some of the ventilation that had been sealed off for some reason. Ventilation is pretty important. In general, the microclimate inside of a bat's roost is very, very important. It's especially important inside of here because this is a maternity colony, and every night when the moms all go out and forage and leave their babies in there, they're in there all night by themselves. I mean, they're with their 100,000 baby friend buddies, but they don't have their moms, and so it needs to stay warm but also not too hot. It's very specific conditions, so we just tried tweaking a lot of things. And whether any of those was the reason or not, I don't know. I mean, maybe the other first house just became so bad. I literally saw raccoons in there. There was rain going in. Pieces were falling apart off of it. As many as possible had already packed into the second house. So many that they couldn't even all go in there. They really wanted to be in there with each other because that's where the other bats were. But that is a very dangerous place to be when there are hawks flying around, waiting for one little bat butt to hang out of the bottom. You don't want to be the bat that's not all the way in the house. So that's some of the things we did.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Do you inspect? Do you actually go in there, or you shoot a camera up there? How do you look and determine the health of the building?
So the Environmental Health and Safety Department is actually in charge of the building as a building. So they do go in, and there is a grate that you can actually open, and they just put a ladder up and they can climb up in there and look around. So, and if you go underneath, you can see up inside. But yeah, they just put a ladder up and go in. And they were the ones that they're actually going to do some update, just some maintenance stuff, regular housing maintenance, some new paint, fixing some of the fascia. They're going to be doing that this winter. So if you come by, you may see someone up there in a ladder. And there's not that many bats in there right now, so they shouldn't be too disturbed. Question? Oh, thank you. Yes, good question. Yes, it is. They do collect it pretty regularly, and they take the guano from under the houses. They come in there with a tractor, they scoop it up, and maybe someone from the garden that does that specifically can talk about what you do with it to process it.
It makes the best compost ever. We mix it with the wood chips, which are also provided by UF, because they're just like constantly removing dead branches and stuff around campus. And it gets this perfect carbon to nitrogen ratio. We have restored the soil in our fields, so Dina said something earlier that it was more sand than soil, and it's still that, but it's got a lot of organic matter, and they're just like the backbone of this farm.
Thanks. So yes, a lot of great benefits to the bats being here. Other questions about the bats? We've got probably 5 or 10 minutes before they emerge, maybe, if we're lucky. All right. Oh, one more question, and then we're done. Okay.
When we lived in Orlando, our condo had all kinds of bats that took over the attics. And it's great seeing so many come out at night. Now we live in Jacksonville, we got a house. Outside of just having a bat house mounted and hope for the best, is there any way to draw them over or import them?
So he just asked the $1 million question is, how do we get the bats to move in? There is not an answer for that. The answer is provide the structure that they want, provide a good house that meets all of the requirements that they're looking for, and have it there ready for them. And then the other component is they need to be looking for a place to live. And that's what I try to emphasize to people. They're not always looking for a place to live. They might be very happy where they're at. You like your house, I hope, where you live. Just because someone builds a house a couple of blocks down the street Do you just move, leave your family, and you go and move into that house? No, you're happy where you're at. But if something happened to your house, then you'd be looking for a new house. So I try and encourage people, yes, if you want to put up a bat house, put up a bat house, and then just be patient. And if the bats are looking for a place, then you're ready to provide that for them. So there are bats everywhere. There are bats in every part of the state. So they're around. You might just not be seeing them.
Is there a direction that you should put your bat house, east, west?
So as far as placement of the bat houses, it really depends on your yard and where you are in the state, how much sun you get, how much shade you get. I will give a little plug for if you go on the UF IFAS EDIS website, the Ask IFAS page, there is a document on there on building bat houses, and that lists some of the suggestions of kind of placement. And I'm intending to put a new document up that just focuses on that, so it maybe be easier to find. So it depends. More than I can probably just give a straight answer for. Okay, with that, I think I'm done, and then people can do whatever they need to do. But I encourage you to stay and see if the bats come out tonight. So.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And this feels like the perfect build-up to the main event for tonight. Help us give all of our speakers one more round of applause. Thank you all so much for being here and for your graciousness and generosity. I know it's a busy week for students, faculty, staff, everyone in Gainesville. And I can't think of a more delightful place to be and to spend this late afternoon and early evening than with you all. I also want to thank Alana, Alex, and Eddie, our student leaders who really have driven this programming forward. Now this is our third semester. We could not be more pumped. And it's, again, thanks to the leadership that you all have taken for this work. So help us give them a big round of applause, too. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for making this so successful. So there are so many takeaways from just this short hour and a half that we've all spent together. I encourage you to ask questions and mingle and meet each other if you haven't had a chance as we continue to wait for the bats. We heard about connectivity and interconnectedness, the importance of living in and with community, and the power of storytelling to really drive a sense of place and to nurture a sense of place and to protect the sense of place that we have. So we really want that to leave with you as you move on and we disperse from here, is to think about the power of one person, of a group of people, of a vision, and the power of advocacy and organizing. There's always room for new ideas and new work, but when we think about stories, we really like to think about the fact that these are all blueprints for this work. So don't be scared to do justice work, to do work that feels important to you. There are generations of people who have forged their own paths, who have stood on the shoulders of giants to make that happen. So we hope that you can kind of take that message with you. I also see some QR codes from my co-sponsors. If you will please take a post-tour survey, it'll help us hear more about what went well, what you would like to see, and to help encourage UF to do this work that really students drive forward. So with that, thank you again. If you parked over here and you would like to take a pastry or a treat to go, please do. If you haven't signed in, please do. If you have questions for us, we would love to talk more to you. So thanks again for being here. And here come the bats, hopefully.